Back in 2015, a game released that would go on to sell over 7.4 million copies. A game that's so beloved that countless people are still begging for its return. That game is... Hey guys, Matt here, and in this video we'll be going over the many things that make Bloodborne such a fantastic and memorable experience and why this game needs to come back. So, grab your saw cleavers, chase down that dirty rat Mikolash, and let's get into this. I think the absolute best place to start is with the game's atmosphere. Atmosphere is something that's pretty difficult to get right in a video game. We've seen several examples of titles that just miss the mark, or games where mood and atmosphere are fantastic, but the game lacks polish in other areas. Now, I know this is a heavily subjective category, but I believe that Bloodborne, like many of FromSoftware's games, nails the atmosphere without compromising other aspects of the game. There's nothing like walking into Central Yharnam for the first time. It's dark, oppressive, and filled with dread. The Gothic-inspired architecture, ominous sound design, as well as the eerie lighting contribute to a sense of unease and impending danger. Now, of course, this can practically be said for the entirety of Bloodborne, since the world is filled to the brim with crumbling architecture, twisted landscapes, and many monstrous beings that were once human, creating a constant feeling of vulnerability and isolation as you navigate through the city of Yharnam and its surrounding locations. In other words, the vibes don't miss, and they even carry on into the lore. The lore of Bloodborne has so much complexity, depth, and the way it's woven into the game's world, atmosphere, and gameplay is nothing short of excellent. At its core, the game tells the story of a cursed city gripped by an insidious plague, turning its inhabitants into grotesque beasts. But as you dig deeper, you uncover something far more terrifying. The mystery behind the Healing Church, controller of all knowledge on blood ministration and all varieties of blood. The truth as to why Gehrman resides within the Hunter's Dream, and the Great Ones, gods from beyond our understanding that manipulate the fate of Yharnam, where madness and knowledge are intertwined. Personally, I find the Healing Church to be one of the more fascinating aspects of the lore, since there's so many unclear answers as to what many of their goals were. Plus, it's believed that the church is directly responsible for the Ashen Blood disease that ravaged Old Yharnam. You know, there's just so many more wonderful topics in the lore that continue to spark conversations within the forums, as well as the game's subreddit, and I think that's partly due to how everything is delivered. You see, instead of handing you the plot, FromSoftware does what FromSoftware does best, and lets you piece together its cryptic lore through exploration, item descriptions, and environmental storytelling. Every discovery leads to more questions, drawing you further into its nightmarish world. The atmosphere and lore are two exceptionally well done things that make Bloodborne's world so immersive and exploring so much fun. That being said, exploration wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable if not for the game's level design. Bloodborne's world is intricately connected with numerous shortcuts and loops that link different areas together. This interconnectedness creates a sense of cohesion, making the world feel like a single massive continuous environment. If you've already gained access to a good chunk of shortcuts, or even just progressed further through the game, then you know just how many locations you can walk through before hitting a loading screen. Spoiler, it's a lot. Along with shortcuts, the level design encourages exploration through hidden paths, optional areas, and valuable items, which allows the players to be rewarded for their curiosity with new weapons, lore, and insight into the game's world. Basically, the sense of discovery is a major component of Bloodborne's levels, as many of its secrets are pretty difficult to find and requires you to keep an eye out for things at all times. A good example of this is the hidden item that allows you to upgrade your weapon to a +10, which is tucked away in a hidden path near Nightmare of Mensis, which is only accessible by dodge rolling out of one of the elevators while it's moving. Bloodborne's level design is truly in a league of its own, especially when compared to other PS4 exclusives, and it had me spending countless hours just walking around exploring, having a blast. Though I will admit, I probably spent just as much time cutting down enemies. The combat in Bloodborne is fast-paced, intense, and unforgiving. You see, unlike FromSoftware's previous entries into the genre, Bloodborne emphasized agility and precision, requiring players to quickly dodge, parry, and counter enemies, making for a greater focus on offensive maneuvers, and encouraging you to adopt an aggressive playstyle rather than a defensive one. FromSoftware made this blatantly obvious by giving you a freaking gun right off the bat instead of some basic ass shield. Get that shit out of here! Oh, sorry you had to see that. You know what? I'm just gonna really quick put this where it belongs, and there. Perfect. Awful shields and jokes aside, I really like the feel of Bloodborne's combat. It punishes hesitation and keeps you on your toes. However, movement is just one part of why I love the combat so much. The other is, I mean, come on, it's the weapons. They're so cool. Weapons are very diverse, plentiful, and even have the ability to transform, which allows for more playstyles and strategies. For example, the thread cane is ideal for speed and precision, transforming from a cane into a bladed whip, offering quick range slashes. On the other hand, Ludwig's Holy Blade caters to those of us who prefer a balance of speed and power, shifting from a longsword to a big, beefy greatsword. You know, personally, I've always been more of a saw cleaver guy. It's great for both short and long range attacks, has fast attack speed, scales great with strength and skill, plus it looks so badass. I mean, just look at it. It's amazing. Beautiful. That being said, I always wind up giving other right-handed weapons a try because not doing so would be robbing myself of new combat experiences. And the same can be said for left-handed weapons. I love using the Hunter's Blunderbuss, but if I only use that, then I would have never experienced the humorous joy of chasing down Mikolosh with a massive cannon during his boss fight. Oh my god, it's so great. Speaking of boss fights, Bloodborne's boss fights are a culmination of practically everything the game does best. Sound design, combat, atmosphere, narrative, it all takes center stage. And the music, oh my god, the music. The soundtrack of Bloodborne features these rich, complex compositions that evoke so many different emotions and really gets you invested in the world. This helps amplify so many of the fantastic and memorable moments you'll have in this game. If I had to pick, I'd say Gehrman's boss music was by far my favorite. The somber violin really drives home the feeling of that fight. Sorry, we're supposed to be talking about bosses, but I really wanted to talk about the music. Anywho, here are some of the bosses that I just really enjoyed. Father Gascoigne was a well-crafted first boss. His fast and aggressive combat style, as well as the emotional depth of his backstory, makes for a fantastic fight. They even tied Gascoigne's backstory into the combat by making his daughter's music box an item that stuns him during the first phase of the fight. Vicar Amelia's fight combines intense combat with strong thematic and atmospheric elements. The boss fight begins with a cutscene showing Amelia transform from a devout religious figure into a monstrous creature. Amelia is fun but challenging because of her fast, wide-reaching attacks and ability to heal, which forces you to balance aggression with strategy. Plus, the atmospheric setting and haunting music adds a bit of tension to the fight, which makes for a pretty memorable experience. I'd also like to throw in Bloodstarved Beast and Murgo's Wet Nurse, since both encounters do a great job of representing the game's atmosphere by having the fights take place in these surreal and terrifyingly ominous locations. Plus, the combat's just incredible. But of course, we can't talk about the bosses without mentioning one of the last and easily top 3 bosses in the base game, Gehrman, the first hunter. Mentor turned opponent. The two of you fight not out of hate, but to save the other. Him desperately trying to save you from the endless dream, and you fighting to end the hunt forever. It's just a fantastic climax to the player's mentor-student relationship. However, these boss fights weren't all too difficult. In fact, I'd say most of the bosses in the main game are relatively easy to take down. Even revisiting Bloodborne, the only boss fight that took me more than like 1 or 2 tries was the combo of Gehrman and the Moon Presence. The same cannot be said for the DLC. Ah yes, the Old Hunters, Bloodborne's one and only DLC that loves to remind me that no matter how good I think I am, I could be better. I remember the first time I started this DLC, I was on one of my New Game Plus characters, and even going up against the first boss with a friend was just pure pain. We got decimated over and over and over again. Man, I had a pretty rough start to this DLC, huh? Old Hunters brings the same level of quality to its atmosphere and setting as the base game, with its 3 newish areas. First being the Hunter's Nightmare, which is sort of a warped, overgrown version of areas within the first tombstone of the base game. I think it's different enough to feel fresh yet familiar, and the new enemies as well as the supporting lore makes this area a really solid start to the DLC. Next is Research Hall, a large multi-level medical facility operated by the Healing Church, where grotesque experiments were performed in the pursuit of knowledge and ascension. The halls are dimly lit with sterile stone floors and large winding stairs. The look and feel of this area, it reminds me a lot of lecture building in the base game, and I love all the shortcuts you can uncover, but man, those bookshelf traps, they really start to get annoying after a while. The third and final area in the DLC is Fishing Hamlet, a haunting, eerie location offering a tragic and mysterious atmosphere. The village is set in a cold, desolate seaside, littered with barnacle-encrusted structures, dilapidated wooden docks, and the remnants of a once thriving fishing community transformed into fish-like creatures. All 3 are very different and they're really good at what they do, but I'd have to say Fishing Hamlet was easily my favorite area in Old Hunters, since it really stood out from not only the other 2 areas in the DLC, but the entirety of the base game. However, the locations, as fun as they may be, pale in comparison to the juicy lore Old Hunter provides. We all know the base game already offers an astronomical amount of rich lore that draws you into its world, but the DLC takes this even further. It delves deeper into the history of the Healing Church, the origins of the nightmare, and the tragic tales of the hunters who came before. By exploring the new areas, you uncover more about the twisted experiments and the horrors that led to the downfall of the original hunters. The DLC also ties together various narrative threads from the main game, adding layers of depth to the overall story, and makes everything feel more cohesive. A lot of lore can be found in the several bosses within the Old Hunters DLC, since many of them play massively important roles in the story. The DLC brings 5 new bosses to the game, and you guys already know how Ludwig was my first time around, but replaying this guy was much easier than before. He took me about 2 tries, and I gotta say, Ludwig is a fantastic boss. Ludwig's fight is split up into 2 distinct phases, each with its own moveset and emotional tone. Phase 1 is chaotic and grotesque, having Ludwig in his monstrous form throwing wildly unpredictable attacks your way. Then in Phase 2, he gains control of his holy blade, completely shifting his mood from an uncontrollable beast into a composed, graceful swordsman. Almost like he's trying to relive his former honor. This is my second favorite boss in the DLC, and definitely in my top 5 when including the base game. Not only for the fun combat, but the incredible music and emotional depth his character displays. Next up is Lawrence, the first vicar, the only optional boss in the Old Hunters DLC. He starts out similarly to the cleric beast, however things change very quickly in the second phase of the fight, where he starts flooding the stage with lava, and negates attacks from the rear with, you guessed it, more lava. Lawrence was pretty challenging in the second phase when it came to keeping an eye out for his lava-based attacks, though I mainly enjoyed his inclusion for lore-based reasons. After all, he is the founder of the Healing Church, and his transformation into a beast kinda reflects the dangers of the church's reliance on blood ministration. Plus, facing him felt as though I was confronting the cause of Yharnam's downfall. Living Failures was a living failure. My controller died at one point during the fight, and I still beat him on my first attempt. Definitely the weakest boss in the DLC and not worth talking about any further. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower was not as easy as Living Failures, but definitely more exciting, especially since her character is deeply intertwined with the lore of the Healing Church and my favorite area in the DLC, Fishing Hamlet. Lady Maria is an aggressive, cautious, and talented fighter with an exceptionally difficult second half where she stabs herself and applies bleed buff to her swords. I quite enjoyed this fight. In terms of combat, it was basically like fighting a much better Gehrman. Plus, the Astral Clock Tower is a hauntingly beautiful arena with a foreboding atmosphere. Though I will say it wasn't as amazing as Gehrman's White Flower Field. This was my favorite fight in the DLC, and I still go back and forth on deciding if it's my favorite fight in the entirety of Bloodborne, since it felt so rewarding and iconic. Speaking of iconic, let's talk about what many consider to be the hardest boss fight in the entire game. Orphan of Kos. I'm not gonna lie, during my first attempt, I thought I misremembered this fight because he was acting like a grade A moron. So I, of course, started to get greedy with my strikes and, well, died. Oh well, I'll get him on the next attempt. Right? Right?
Jane, you ignorant slut.
This guy took me about 5 attempts to finally take down, which is actually 1 or 2 more than my first time facing him outside of New Game Plus. Orphan of Kos uses what I think is weaponized placenta to pull off a significant amount of moves with varying ranges in his first phase. In his second phase, he becomes larger and gains new moves as well as enhanced versions of his previous attacks. As someone who finds most of the base game bosses pretty easy, this was a very refreshing fight. Not only that, but the mood is on point, having this haunting, mournful score playing while facing him on a desolate beach. It really drives home the pain he must feel for Kos, who was wrongfully killed and experimented on by the Healing Church. Okay, technically that last part isn't 100% confirmed, but as the all-knowing wiki states, most agree that the hunters did some blasphemous violation of her body, likely by dissecting her to get her eldritch blood. Regardless of his motivations, I still think this was a perfect way of ending the Old Hunters DLC. To sum up the DLC, the boss fights for the most part give you more of what we all loved from the base game, with a bit more challenge sprinkled in. The Old Hunters' areas, weapons, and lore fit naturally into the world, enriching the base game rather than feeling like a separate experience, which makes the Old Hunters a fun and necessary addition to the base game. Hell, it even goes beyond that, containing things I prefer over the base game, and I'm so happy I replayed it for the video. In case I didn't make it clear throughout this video, Bloodborne is more than just my favorite PS4 title. It's probably in my top favorite games ever released. With an immersive gothic atmosphere, incredibly well-crafted lore, intense fast-paced combat, and level design that you can pour several hours into exploring, it's no wonder why so many people, myself included, have been begging Sony to remaster the game for all platforms. I mean, my god, we've had people make demakes, mods for Elden Ring, and even a freaking retro kart racer based on Bloodborne. Hell, even when you go into the Steam reviews for some of Sony's PC releases, you'll always find at least one guy saying, "Now give us Bloodborne," or "Please let Bloodborne be next." I'm just saying, Sony, I'll be more than happy to pay $70 for a remaster of the game and its DLC. Hell, I'll even pre-order it. To those of you who are still fighting the good fight, I salute you. And to those who've created mods or even games inspired by Bloodborne, I thank you. I don't know if we'll ever see a Bloodborne remaster, but I hope one day Sony, FromSoftware, or whoever finally listens, because this game is incredible and more people need to have access to it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and why not leave a comment down below telling me what struggles and triumphs you experienced in Bloodborne. Anywho, I've been rezoraptor, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace!